Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about learning new skills. Well, let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, what methods do you use to learn new skills in your field of expertise, such as back-end and front-end development? Well, I am one of those weird people who claim to be a full stack developer, and so for me, both of these things are relevant. But I want to say as well that I don't just do this sort of stuff because I have a range of things that I usually do. So, I have personal projects, like tons of various things that I've been toying around with, and so forth and so forth. But I also have things that are work related that I need to learn, such as right now, for example, the company that I'm working for is making a move for basically making a bunch of departments and so forth and so forth learn how to use Power Apps, Microsoft's answer to, well, at least in my opinion, Dreamweaver. Basically, they've, in my opinion, more or less invented Dreamweaver with like integrations and stuff like that. It's nicer than Dreamweaver to a certain point, but it's basically the same thing if you ask me. And that's something that I have to look at. And then I have, I make a lot of console applications for various things that I need to do, because I'm one of those people who try to automate things. If I'm doing it the first time, it doesn't really matter all that much to me. But if it's something that I know that it's going to take a lot of time or things like that, I just make a CLI for it. I think the last one I made was in C# with the new console package that is still in. It's not part of the standard library, but it's gonna make it it may make its way in soon, or Commander or something similar to that in JavaScript land. So what I did here now is basically tell you about a bunch of projects that I've been playing around with, and that is, honest to God, that's gonna be the root of my answer to this question. I'm a big believer, and will probably preach that forever, in hands-on learning. So what I like to do is that I like to first just read up a little bit on a subject, just so I get sort of what it's about, because if I don't know anything about it, it's hard to get my hands dirty with something. But once I have understood by doing some basic coursework or an introduction or a crash course or something like that to the topic that I find interesting, then I try as much as possible to, at least in software, which is that's sort of, honest to God, that is, I've reflected on this a few times, and I've always come up with that it's a bit of a luxury to be interested in programming, because the cost of experimentation is fairly low. Imagine if you had my approach and you were, I don't know, working with some very expensive material or something like that, where like every single time you want to play around with something, you're going to have to fork up some cash in order to be able to do that. In software, it's as easy as, hey, do you have a computer? I'm not saying that they're cheap and so forth, but if you compare to more expensive crafts, it's pretty much a luxury, if you ask me. And so that's what I do. I'm reminded of I'm not sure if this is true or not, but I read an article about a while back which sort of tried to illustrate this point by saying that there was a competition, if I remember correctly, that where the idea was to create a commercial airline that could fly between the UK and France, if I remember correctly. And the people who won, or the company that won, had done something that was contrary to what most of the industry was doing at that time. And so what most people will do is that they will try to design the perfect airplane, which is natural, right? It's an airplane competition, right? But the company that had won had said that our strategy was to make the process of creating a prototype as cheap as possible, so that we could create a lot of examples and try them out. And I think that they had done something. These are probably fake numbers, but like they produced 10 prototypes in the same time another company did it in one, right? And that iteration teaches you something. And that is exactly what I do. Exactly the same thing. If you go to my GitHub, you will see that I have tons of repositories that are like just garbage, all of it. Well, not all of it, but a lot of it is just garbage because that's what I do. Let's say I want to learn something about backend. Let's say that we're going to do a new backend language or something like that. So, for example, I had a while back, I got into Rust. This was a few years ago. And I thought, all right, so the first thing I'm going to do is that first and foremost, I need to do some basic syntax learning because, I mean, the Rust is slightly different from other languages that I'd worked with. And the borrow checker, of course, and so forth and so forth. So I did some basic code katas, where you just, hey, implement an algorithm that does A, B, and C, and so forth. And so just to get the syntax going, right? And then I knew that, okay, so now I want to learn how to make a basic web application because I come from web, so of course I want to make web applications. And that means that I need to learn how to use the package manager, I need to know how to spin up a server, and then I usually make some slightly toyish REST API type of thing, right? And then I try to figure out how to connect to a database and like these basic things that most backend developers do. And then, I go and take the next project. Okay, so if I can now make a basic application, what can I do next with the thing? Well, let's make a CLI, for example. That's also something I enjoy making, as I was mentioning. And so I do that. And I think that, at some point I try to implement like a Lexer and I've made a pseudo programming. It's not really a programming language. The intention was to try to make a proof of concept of how to replace the way that something like style components and similar sorts of CSS in JS solutions, how they work, and instead do it as a static thing. Where my idea was basically that because I really like just using plain old CSS because I believe that perfection in how to scale CSS was reached when BEM or block element modifier, like that pattern, if you use that, you will never need anything else. Like everything else is like, to me, like it's a mute point because that is, in my opinion, the superior way of doing it. And so of course I'm thinking, well, the thing that is really nice about CSS and JS is that if you parse all the CSS, you can then you can optimize the output. Because if you have a bunch of selectors and classes and stuff going on right in your style sheet, it's not optimized for maximum leanness. And so then I make I will start making a Lexer and like a ASD parser and stuff like that. And I don't think I ever finished that and so forth. But it's the same thing I do in front of. Build a bunch of things that I know will be projects where I have to challenge myself a little bit into doing something I'm not 100% sure how to do. So in front end, the first thing is of course I get the fucking thing up to just get the project running, right? That's number one. And then once I have a Hello World application, okay, the next thing is, standard thing is to be able to create some pages, to be able to switch between them. Another standard thing is submitting data, like creating forms and things like that. And then of course some type of authentication or like some way of saying, hey, you can see this page or you cannot see that page or so forth and so forth. I don't get fancier than that usually, but that is usually enough for me to understand how to work with front end, at least when it comes to application development. And then I always make sure that I check my boxes for how to manage state, because that's one of the big challenges in front-end development. How do you do shared state between components? Like if you're in Angular, Vue, React, or in these days I'm using web components, for example. So these are the normal checkboxes things that I check when I want to learn a new skill, and it doesn't get fancier than that, honest to God. So what I want you to take away from this is that the method that I use in order to learn new skills, it doesn't really matter if it's back-end, front-end, or whatever library it is, it's the same deal every single time. Start by reading up on the subject so I can at least get a basic gist of what capabilities like a framework or a tool has, so like roughly how the intention of usage is and stuff like that, right? And then as soon as I have done some basic tutorials and so forth, I start building basic projects and I scale them up, like I make them more and more advanced. So I start, as I was saying, like for backend it's always the same. Start with creating a REST API of some sort, then connect to a database, then maybe do some authentication and so forth, because I know based on years and years of working that these are the basic tasks. Like if you start from nothing, let's say you have a greenfield project and you're going to ship that to a customer, all that more or less, not every single time, but almost every single time, that's going to be part of your daily job, right? And so that's why I always do the same journey every single time, because I know that for me to really get that grip on a new backend language or framework and stuff like that, I have to know how to start from nothing and be able to make a basic proof of like MVP type of CRUD application thing, something like that. Front end the same, is basically the same thing. Start with nothing, build do the journey a few times, build an application that has form submission, navigation, stuff like that, and so forth and so forth. And then if I want to get really fancy, I create like CLIs or things like that, depending on needs and so forth. But that's my tip to you guys. Like, try to avoid over analyzing learning and things like that, and try to avoid getting into decision blockage by like trying to figure out which is the perfect tutorial for me, and then don't get stuck in tutorial hell either, because that's like that's also something very true that one of my old martial art teachers used to say, that you can read every single book about martial arts, but unless if you never throw a punch, or like you actually going out and practice, you're never going to get any good at it. It's the same deal here, guys. Use like 80-20, 20% study, then reflect on what you have learned, and do 80% like trying out stuff, see what works, and then you're going to have a lot of failures and you're going to have a lot of shitty projects. My tip to you is, you want to stay humble for the rest of your career, keep that shit. Keep the stuff that didn't work out, just so that you can go back and read up when you start to get a little bit too full of yourself and see that actually, yeah, I kind of fucked up quite a few times before I could even get this thing right. It works really well for me at the very least. So I'd like to think at the very least. Have a great day.